Hello, and welcome back to Questions That Matter. This is the space where we discuss the interesting and important work that we do at TrustBridge. Today, I have with me my colleague Bhavin Patel, and Bhavin, our colleague Karan, and I co wrote a paper on good order writing and writing good regulatory orders. Now, the reason that we started thinking about writing this paper is because we were studying regulatory orders at scale. We looked at orders of the SEBI, the ERC, so that's the securities regulator and the electricity regulators. And we also studied how they perform in appeal. So we looked at how SEBI performs in appeal and how ERCs perform in appeal. And we realized that there is some scope for improvement in the way in which orders are written. And perhaps that would add to some of the clarity and also make the appellate processes smoother. Bhavin, hi, congratulations on the new paper. So we saw the problem, but why was it important?
Thanks. I think it's useful to consider who's affected by regulatory orders, and that gives us some sense of why it's important that these be written in a better manner. There are at least four sets of people that are affected by the quality of a regulatory order. Most immediately and obviously, it is the parties who are involved in the matter that is being decided upon. And it's important that they are able to access the information that's important to them quickly and in language that is comprehensible to them, that makes sense to them, that they understand. That's one set of people that's affected. The second is the regulator itself, for a number of reasons, but one among those is that regulatory orders receive widespread attention in the media. This is something that we've seen in the case of SEBI. We've seen what sort of reports might appear about the regulator in case an important decision is overturned in appeal. And all of these affect the confidence of market participants. All of these affect the confidence that we have in the regulatory ability to adjudicate these matters. And so it's important for the regulator to ensure that its decisions are upheld. There is also an effect on the appellate and review fora. If a decision is challenged, then somebody who's deciding the challenge needs to be able to access the information they need. They should be able to identify it in a particular spot every single time. And so the structuring matters, the completeness of the order matters to that group of people as well. And finally, of course, for anybody, the market, the general public who's interested in understanding whether or not they can undertake certain actions, it's critical that regulatory orders clearly spell out what is and is not permissible, that these are consistent over time, and all of these are core rule of law principles. And if you put all of these together, I think it becomes very obvious why the quality of regulatory orders is such a critical and important area to work on.
Thanks, Bhavin, for highlighting those concerns. But how do we translate these concerns into implementable or concrete suggestions?
We now have a sense of who's affected by regulatory orders and what they might need. So we've tried to translate these into a set of principles. And our suggestion is that if these principles are satisfied, then the concerns of those various groups of people would also be addressed. And how do we implement this into measures that can be followed in order writing? We've created a set of requirements. So the claim here is that if you follow those requirements, then you will be able to address the principles. The principles start with the regulator establishing what the basis of exercise of regulatory power is. And this can go on to include things such as, if I claim that a particular violation has taken place, what are the provisions of law that relate to that? If I claim that I want to take certain action against the person involved in the proceedings, what is the basis for my taking that power, taking that action? If I impose certain sanctions, once again, why these and not others? Why this quantum or duration of sanction and not something else? If we are able to satisfy these, then the concerns of the stakeholders would be addressed. But how do we convert these into easy to implement suggestions? Four sets of requirements. The first is what we call the information requirements. The certain information that would be required, and this should be apparent on the face of the order. So for example, what was the date of the show cause notice? When did the hearings take place? All of these also help establish that there was due process that was followed, that natural justice was followed in the adjudication process. And so these are non-trivial requirements.
No, definitely. And it sounds like a lot of this would be part of what we call the procedural history
Certainly.
of the matter. And perhaps there is a more streamlined way for regulators to start including the procedural history in their orders.
Certainly. And this is something that we expect to see in an appellate court. How did this matter reach me? But it's also important to talk about in a regulatory context. When did the investigation start? When was the report filed? How was I appointed to take this decision? And on what basis am I exercising my authority? So it's critical for those reasons. The second set of reasons is what we call, or requirements is what we call the substantive requirements. These relate closely to the provision of law that I say has been violated. So if there's a statutory provision or a regulatory provision and I say that this has been violated, I must make out all the elements of that statutory or regulatory provision.
And a simple example of that would be that if you need to prove a violation of insider trading, you must establish that somebody was an insider, for example.
Absolutely. And these correlate very closely to the reasons why an appellate fora might overturn your decision in appeal. And so if you're able to very strongly and clearly establish that all the ingredients of the violation have been made out, it becomes difficult to challenge this. Which brings us to our third set of requirements, which are structural requirements. Now, we suggest that there's a certain manner in which information should flow. This has at least two clear benefits. The most obvious benefit is that it enables or assists readability. It makes it easier to follow what's happening in the decision. But the second, and I dare say, perhaps more important reason, is that it also strengthens the argument. We know that there is a particular manner in which strong logical or legal arguments are made. And if you follow that in the order writing process, once again, the strength of the argument is bolstered.
And would that be the same as reproducing parties' arguments or reproducing a show cause notice?
I think what you're alluding to is that that's not what it should include. So there isn't great value to reproducing materials such as the show cause notice in their entirety. There isn't great value to reproducing the arguments in their entirety. But let's think back to how we're taught the basics of making strong legal arguments. We need to clearly identify the law, and we've talked about that in the information requirements. We need to clearly identify what the material facts are in this particular instance, how those facts map onto the law, and therefore what the conclusion should be. Do we follow this sequence in order writing? If we do, the strength of the argument might be improved. And the final thing, which again is related, is there is a tendency to use, occasionally at least, archaic and complicated or technical language in order writing. This is undesirable. Once again, it affects the strength or clarity of the argument, but it also affects some of the concerns we talked about earlier. The parties who are affected by the order and who need to understand it most immediately need to understand what's happening in the order. And so the language must be clear. There are movements across the world for plain legal writing, and we think it would be useful to have that sort of writing in regulatory orders as well.
And so what happened when we tried to implement these suggestions for orders of the SEBI and ERC?
I think we saw some dramatic results with only some very basic attempts at implementation. So we took two orders, one by the SEBI and one by one of the state electricity regulatory commissions. And we said, look, let's not try everything. Let's just try the simplest things. Number one, remove everything that is a redundant reproduction. For example, reproducing statutory provisions in their entirety or reproducing extensive portions from the show cause notice. And let's restructure these in the manner that we suggest. And just that alone, in one instance, reduced the size of the order by 47%, in another by 17%. Both of these reworked orders are appended to our paper. And I'd invite everyone to go take a look, compare it against the original, and we think these certainly read better, but we'd love to hear what you think as well.
And so what next, Bhavin? We have these set of requirements. We think that they should be implemented. And in our paper, we also talk about how regulators can implement them. So do you want to talk us talk to us about that?
Certainly. I think there are at least three sites of change or three areas where you can think about the implementation of these ideas. One perhaps is in the parent statute. So if the statute gives you guidelines or provisions that are not implementable in practice, there's precious little that an order writer can do.
Mm-hmm.
And so from everything that we've learned, are there clearer guidelines, more implementable provisions that can be set down in parent legislation and in regulation that can enable better order writing? That's one set. The second is within the regulatory organization itself. Do order writers have the training they need? Do they have the resources they need? Do they have access to all the materials that they might need to write orders in this manner? And a third, and I think particularly interesting and exciting way of thinking about things is we've used technology extensively in the process of analyzing orders, pulling out data, and it's on the basis of that that we come up with these suggestions for improving the quality of order writing. Might you be able to use technology to create solutions such as a precedent checker?
Mm-hmm.
There are several hundred regulatory orders that are issued every day. It becomes difficult for an order writer to figure out what the applicable precedent in their situation might be. Can you use technology to help create a solution that would pull out the relevant applicable precedent for an order writer? That's one.
That sounds like it would be very helpful.
We certainly think so. And we're also exploring ideas about whether there are other applications of this technology that could enable better order writing as a whole. So is there something that can help with structuring? Is there something that can help ensure the completeness of an order?
Mm-hmm.
All of these, of course, without taking away from the core constitutional requirement that there must be application of mind by the regulatory officer. These are solutions that might supplement the order writer's efforts. They might aid the order writer's efforts without taking away the discretion or the authority vested in that officer.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, Bhavin. This was a great paper to write with you and with Karan. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.